Hey everyone, and welcome to the Power Within You podcast. I'm delighted to introduce Ali. Ali, what's happening? It's so lovely to see you. Thank you so much for coming on the Power Within You podcast. I really appreciate your time.
I'm really happy to be here. I'd maybe like to start with acknowledging that I'm a settler living and working on the ancestral and unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. As part of our Indigenous reconciliation in Canada, I think it's important to note the land in which I'm working and living on and the stolen lands of the Indigenous people here.
Now, thank you so much for sharing that as well. I appreciate that, and thank you for starting with that too. So, listen, Ali, I met Ali. Ali's now living in Vancouver, so far away from me. And I miss her very much. But Ali was based in the UK and moved recently, which I don't blame you, to be fair. Like, it's good that like things going on in the UK at the moment. It's great that you were able to get out and go somewhere that you love as well. But I met Ali probably before the pandemic, so 2018, 19, I believe.
Mhm.
And Ali was looking for a coach at that time. And when I started working with Ali, I mean, you'll see this as we talk, but she is a remarkable human being, like inspirational, articulate, creative, highly intelligent, and just a really wonderful, beautiful human being. And for me, when I realised that I wanted to do coaching and take it forwards, was part of my journey with Ali. I don't think you know this actually. I had a session with you, and I walked away with feeling this like complete warmth in my chest. Like it was just felt like, and I just felt like so much love and so much like I just enjoyed speaking to you so much, and I was benefiting from this relationship as well. So it was just amazing to be able to meet you, and I can't wait for people to hear about your journey, about where you began and where you are now with both your career and your emotional well-being as well. So thank you.
Yeah, so I'm super excited to be here because you've been such a pivotal point in my life, and you came in at a time where I really needed you. So, yeah, I'm excited to dig into that experience and kind of how that led me on the path I'm on now.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back a bit. Let's go back to when I met you, I suppose, or just before I met you. What was kind of going on for you at that time in your career? Like you kind of had been working at Pivotal at the time, right?
Yeah, I was working at Pivotal, which is a tech company where we build custom software for different clients. I was mostly working with nonprofits at the time, so I had co-founded with my partner and part of the business that focused on using and leveraging our tools and ways of working of building software and helping nonprofits do that as well. So how can you use those tools to build software for those that really need it in the health space or in the emergency and kind of crisis areas as well? So I was at a point where I was really looking at how I can be an authentic leader, how I can show up, and I think I saw my professional and my personal life as completely separate pieces. And so I was at the same time doing cognitive behavioral therapy. And so I was like, oh, I'm just going to have this over here and then my coaching over here. And I think I just saw them as completely different tracks, that they weren't intertwined. And I think through working with you and really talking about the experiences and things that were going on in my personal life or that had happened in my childhood or wherever it kind of took place, that those things were showing up in how I show up as a leader as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to note that actually we tend to separate ourselves from work and personal life. We are one person, and we don't tend to see ourselves holistically or behave in a holistic way. And I think that's what misses that authentic leadership, and your authentic self, bringing that to work as well. So when did it, through the CBT and coaching, how did you start forming that authentic self?
Yeah, how did I start to? Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say that it took a lot of unpacking what happened in my past and things that were going on and maybe how that kind of formed some unhelpful narratives or perhaps tendencies that I fell back on. I think in terms of my journey, I really early on tried to control a lot of things that were out of my control completely, and I didn't really have that inner capacity or those tools and the knowledge to work through what was happening in my outer reality, and that usually manifested itself in kind of overexerting myself, through university, moving around a lot, pushing myself to the limits with work, all as a way to distract myself. And so I saw that as a place that you could kind of escape those things, and that was like a thing I could control and manage. And so I think in working and acknowledging some of those things and those tendencies, and that was a crutch, and that wasn't serving me, and it led to burnout multiple times. That wasn't working, and I like couldn't sustain that any longer. So I guess I came to a point where I had to face it, and I had to work through some of those maybe more difficult memories and kind of pieces of my life to actually show up as an authentic leader as well, because that can change your work relationships, change your relationships in your personal life as well. So I would say that's kind of how it all started.
And I guess burnout manifests differently with different people as well. So for
Hmm.
you, were there some red flags that you saw before the burnt out happened, and what were the burnt out symptoms when you were actually experiencing it?
Hmm. I don't think that I recognized the flags, to be honest. When the first one happened, I was living in New York at the time. I was working really, really long hours, and there was a lot of pressure to produce, or kind of, we'll find someone else that can do it faster and better than you can. And I think that unfortunately that kind of work culture is really common in places like New York. And I just after grad school, I just went right into the workforce, and I wanted to be right in there, and I was really excited about some of the work I was doing. And so I just kind of plugged along and kept going, and it wasn't sustainable. And that pressure to perform or also kind of be replaced type of mentality really was ingrained, and that caught up. And I remember there was a really big software demo in front of a client, and I remember going to the loo just before, and I fainted in the washroom, and it was a terrible
That's
feeling.
awful.
It was terrible, and they had to call my partner. And I just remember it was almost like a movie. I was in the cab, and I was watching all of the like skyscrapers pass by, and I was like, maybe 23 at the time, and I was like, this isn't sustainable. This isn't okay. I need to make change, because I can't. And I kind of promised myself after that moment that I wouldn't do that again. But it's a struggle to notice those flags and to be aware of them. And I think I have a lot more practices now that help me acknowledge those, and kind of notice when you're not kind of self-regulating, you're not taking stock of how you're doing in your body and your mind, because I just saw those as completely separate things. So yeah, I think that's kind of my journey to burnout, and I would say I'm still working through making sure that I'm noticing and taking stock.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that, like, obviously you worked for, although you created Pivotal Act within a big corporate who got bought
Mhm.
eventually,
Mhm.
you were searching for purpose and meaning in your work, and you always have done since I've known you. That's been the ultimate thing, right? Is have that purpose and add value to someone else's life. So when you went to Snook, you became very senior in this role, and they were doing amazing things and amazing projects. But
Mhm.
I know that during that time, you also struggled with your burnout over there.
Mhm.
So even though you found that value and purpose, that it was still happening, the stress was still there.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and I think that stress is there's always going to be demands in any job that you go to. And I think there's also a lot of stuff going on in my life as well. That was also like the height of the pandemic. And there are people in my family that struggle with mental illness, and there's just a lot going on in my personal life as well. And so that all contributes
Yeah.
to just trying to balance all of it. And it wasn't sustainable. And I think even if you have a really great mission and motivation and whatever you're doing, I think that sometimes can also feed into like you want to keep pushing yourself harder and harder, because the cause, or whatever you're working on. You want to make sure that you're delivering great products and services to those that need it. And so I think, yeah, it can really happen to anybody if you're not constantly regulating. But also it needs to be baked into the culture of self-care, and really not overextending, not overselling, just being really mindful of those things. And any business, I think, can can fall into that, especially in the time of pandemic when, so many things economically changed for companies and stuff like that. So I'm thinking a lot of people fell into that because we've all read a lot about what
Yeah.
happened during the pandemic for people and really making kind of a turning point for people in recognizing where do you want to spend your time, what do you want to do, how do you want to find purpose and meaning in your work
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you're very creative. You threw your work into art as well and drawing. And I know that you had a little studio whilst you were in London as well during the pandemic, which is amazing. What I know that's been part of your healing process.
Hmm.
So what are the tools and techniques that you've used both internally and externally to manage your emotional well-being and your mental health?
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely been a process of figuring out which tools work. I think there isn't a manual on how to deal with difficult memories, emotions, or grief, and I would say that the three approaches that have been most significant for me and are approaches that I've really stuck with are morning pages, um, and really adopting that reflective practice, making space for that. And then I would say movement, which I do through dance, and then art. So all of those are quite creative outlets for me, but the combination of those three have been quite powerful. So for morning pages, if you're not familiar with that, I learned about it through the Artist's Way. I read that book about 3 years ago, and I've been writing every morning since. So I wake up, and the first thing that I do is I get out my notebook. I write whatever pops into my head. It's very unfiltered. Some of them are ideas, maybe for work or maybe for my art. Or perhaps they might be things that are kind of spinning in my mind, maybe things that I replay and I start to notice those kind of subtle shifts and where it might become a little bit of like a negative thought or something that isn't helpful. And sometimes events happen in your life that are like unexpected, you can't plan for, but some of those subtle shifts in mindset, they're a gradual change. And so I think for me, just making with burnout and just knowing that I kind of fall into that tendency and that I kind of throw myself into work or into things I'm really passionate about. The morning pages helps kind of keep me on track and make sure that if I am kind of observing something over and over and over again and it isn't helpful or it isn't kind of helping me in whatever I'm trying to do, it's kind of noting it and then okay, how can I address this? How can I move forward? And I think also just making space for things that are going really well or reflecting on things that bring you a lot of joy and happiness, as a way to continue focusing on those things because sometimes it's hard to make space for those. And I definitely recognize that this kind of routine is not always available for people might not have the time to do it, but if you do have about 10 to 15 minutes, it's been hugely rewarding for me and just keeps me in balance and very really self-regulated.
Absolutely. I think, and I've always suggested this, like that self-awareness is key. So it's the first step to your healing and understanding what you're going through. And I think morning pages or even journaling is
Yeah.
something which you could do, which just gets it out of your head onto paper. So it just makes more sense. And if it
Hmm.
doesn't make more sense, it will start making sense if you do it on a regular basis, right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So tell
And
me
that,
more. Yeah, sorry, sorry,
oh
Ellie. Go
no.
ahead. Go ahead. No, no, no. Tell me, tell me.
No, I was gonna say, yeah, I guess that in the combination with movement and finding other outlets as well, because writing is really, really great. It's a nice self-reflective experience, but I think any way to bring yourself into a collective experience can also be such a moment of joy. It can be playful and really expressive and that dance and movement is such a huge joy for me. You're very present in the moment and you're able to move through emotions without language or writing it down, which I think I didn't really fully recognize the value of that until moving to Vancouver and maybe joining lots of different studios here and just like people moving through things and healing from things that they've been holding for a really long time. And it's amazing that regardless of where you've moved from, or like a lot of people, we don't even use words. You can just express yourself through movement, which I think is absolutely beautiful about it.
It's so healing. Like, just, I think it's so, we don't know enough about movement and dance and how that really, makes us feel good and joyful as well. I think that should be practiced more in schools, for example, like we all need to kind of practice that. It's so fascinating. And so using these tools, it sounds like you're doing these on a regular basis now to kind of manage
Hmm.
your mental health and emotional well-being. I mean, you made a shift in a few different ways. So you left the UK to go back to Vancouver, to back to
Hmm.
Canada, and you changed. You're always in this sort of area of field, but you decided to kind of switch to something else. Can you explain
Hmm.
to the listeners the shift that you made in your career recently?
Yeah, yeah, so yeah, I spent most of my career, well, my entire career designing apps. Creating a responsible and impactful technology has been my my whole life up until this point, and now I've essentially swapped engineers for health practitioners, and it's been an amazing shift. I knew the areas where I wanted to work. Mental health was one of them, because mental illness and addiction is part of my family, and I've always wanted, if I can apply my own skills in a small way to addressing the mental health crisis, I knew that that would be, I'd want to be part of that change, and that would be really meaningful for me. And the interesting thing is that there are so many overlaps, from engineering and building custom software, and then designing protocols and the way that you create services. There's obviously the differences, but there is a lot of overlap to it. And so now I work with doctors and therapists and, yeah, frontline staff to design and deliver new services like psychedelic assisted therapy and well-being support to help people that are living with depression, addictive disorder, post-traumatic stress, so that they can find healing. And I think knowing that these therapies can offer alternative ways of healing for people that are struggling is such a huge motivation for me, because mental illness touches so many families. I think it's like 1 in 3 people in their lifetime in Canada will, struggle with mental illness in their lifetime. And so being part of that change is, yeah, really, really exciting for me. And I feel very, very privileged to be working in this space.
Oh, it's amazing. It's at the forefront. I don't think perhaps that you could have done this here in the UK because, lots of things are illegal here and we're just not ready for that either. And I think, North America has those resources and knowledge as well to move forward. There's some sort of research being done here on psychedelics. But
Mm-hmm.
certainly, when I've been doing my MSc, we've touched on psychedelics and how they are benefiting people. But, what I mean, if you could explain, like, how do psychedelics, like, because you have this like image of psychedelics, and I started watching that Netflix documentary called the
Mm-hmm.
You Can
How to
Change Your
change it.
Mind, Has
Mm-hmm.
Changed Your Mind, exactly.
Yeah.
And how like LSD, for example, was just totally misused by the psychologist, and he just put it out there for everyone to use, and it wasn't controlled in any way. But it's been
Mm-hmm.
going on for decades, this research.
Yeah.
It's just been under the carpet a little bit, like, and it's got such a bad reputation. So what is it about psychedelics in conjunction with therapies that can really help someone with trauma, for example?
Hmm. Yeah, there's been such a resurgence, and there was so much incredible research that was done in, the 50s, and then exactly what you said, and then what happened in the 60s, and what we saw, and now what we're seeing in Canada and in the US and other places, that we're starting to see regulations and policies shifting, which is really, really exciting. There's a special access program in Canada where you can apply, for MDMA and psilocybin to help people that are living with some of these mental health, illnesses. And so, really, at Numinous, we see the power in pairing that with therapy, because the prep work that goes into preparing for psychedelics, this completely mind altering substance that can help expand, the way of thinking and how to change your mind, just as the documentary really outlines and highlights, is that preparation, going through taking the medicine, experiencing, uncovering some things that maybe you locked away, maybe you didn't know, or really processing that with someone in a guided way. And then afterwards, really that integration, because you're going to have all of these learnings from the medicine and the power of these indigenous practices that have so much to teach us. And working with a therapist through that process is absolutely um, key in that well-being and that journey through healing. And so we really see the value of that process, and bringing that to people in a safe and a safe way that's very designed towards their needs. So that's really where that kind of design piece comes in. It's how can you put the person and the relationships around them at the center of the process, and design a model of care to support them regardless of what situation they're going through.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what's the sort of ultimate objective in Numinous? Like, what is the aim of like, what's the hope in 10 years' time, for example? Where will we be? You know?
Yeah, so much of it is dependent on the landscape and how things change, right? With regulations, and hopefully we see movement. There is small shifts in decriminalization. We are seeing these subtle changes happening, but the goal would be to continue supporting as many people as possible struggling with various different illnesses or things that they may not have had any support with, or they've kind of exhausted all of their options. And so if we can see people, we have lots of different clinics in Canada and the US, hopefully seeing more people offering services online as well, as much as possible, that are outside of the clinic, because there's so much in terms of, as I said, with the prep and integration and mindfulness practices that can be so beneficial for people as well that might not have a diagnosis or something like that, but that these practices can be useful for anyone, really, regardless of what you're going through, because we're all going to wobble, we're all going to have challenging events that come up in our lives. And so our goal is to help those people or support those people in any way we can.
Absolutely. No, it's incredible. Like, it's just amazing, the research ongoing with this, and it's so poignant, isn't it, that this documentary's come out, and people is kind of bringing up to the public eye, in the public
It's,
domain.
yeah, I think that this is going to be so powerful to help address the stigma, because I think we do see a lot around mental health now and a lot more awareness, but the stigma is absolutely still there and really prevalent. And so having a documentary that, is at the top of your Netflix, everyone can see it, and understand really the history of it, where it started, where it's going, the research trials, the evidence behind it. I think that will just bring a lot of awareness that is absolutely needed right now to really, yeah, break down some of that unhelpful stigma that's preventing people from getting the support that they need.
Yeah, and it's all about, it is around the equity of services as well that's offered, right? Like, it's like, okay, we can provide treatments, right, and we can resource and that sort of stuff. We are so fundamentally under resourced in
Mm-hmm.
mental health, and underfunded, but also there's an inequity and
Mm-hmm.
equality of people accessing services as well. Like, and I see this now, and I've been more aware of it, of like, culturally we all perceive mental health differently. So coming from an
Mm-hmm.
Indian background, for example, we don't talk about our feelings. We're never used to it. Our parents' generation is. So how on earth did they dealt with mental health, or they dealt with depression or stress, anxiety? It still existed for time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like, they weren't able to access it or not know how to access it. And like I still see this, and I
Mm-hmm.
and I know that in Canada, for indigenous populations where there is inequity to access this, are those things being tackled? Do you see, like, are they being tackled as well?
Yeah, I think that there's still so much work to be done with acknowledging what has happened, what has ongoing, what is still happening, and then how do we make sure that we are designing and providing safe, inclusive, and equitable care regardless of the situation. And I think that there are a lot of health justice movements pushing for that radical change, and I think that's super exciting. And I think we all need to play a role. It's not just like this company or this nonprofit. It is like we all are in this together to collectively imagine better ways to support people in their journey. And this is absolutely essential for all of us, right? Like we all benefit. We are the sum of our parts, and we all
Mhm.
need to help push towards a better future and radically shift our thinking as to what's possible, because the way the health system is designed right now is absolutely failing us. I know, we're all very aware of that. It's not meeting the diverse needs that we absolutely need it to. So it needs some radical rethinking. And I think we're at the early forefront of that, which is really exciting, building on so much that has worked in the past, building on the evidence, building on the research.
Yeah, and we need to move forwards. And I know it's baby steps, of course, but it's about moving forwards and being able to like make that change in a positive way. I think
Mm-hmm.
the other thing that's affecting, particularly North America, is the opioid crisis as well,
Mm-hmm.
which is prevalent. Because of how it's misused and given out to people.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you wrote this beautiful and poignant article called Untangling Grief. Could you tell us
Mm-hmm.
more about why that came about and what it's about?
Yeah. Yeah, at Christmas time, I was back for the holidays. Yeah, and that was kind of the first time that I had seen my family. So I moved back late in the fall, and my family's kind of split all around Canada. So I was going back to see people, and unfortunately at the same time, it was kind of emotional even thinking back to it. But
Of course.
my
Take your time.
yeah, my cousin passed away from a fentanyl overdose, and yeah, it's super super tragic. So it's definitely still something I'm working through, and it just really brings that, as you said, the opioid crisis and how prevalent it is, and how people don't have access to resources, how there's so much shame as well, and just a lack of awareness as to, yeah, and also toxic drug supply. There's so many factors to it, and just people not knowing where to turn. And my cousin, struggled with his own addiction, and has for a long time. So yeah, it's unfortunate that, yeah, unknowingly took something laced with fentanyl and an overdose. And so the article that I wrote was really trying to untangle grief from something that is like so unexpected. You can't plan for that. It was a shock, and it like kind of sent ripples through the whole family. And so going through that, and just that was the first time I experienced like a massive panic attack as well. Like I was completely in absolute shock because I had plans to see him, and we had been exchanging letters, like for years and years. And so I was really excited to see him and everything. And so that was a process of me of understanding, and art was like a huge driver for that. I've been really exploring this concept of roots, and the tangled roots that happen below the surface. And you may see a brilliant tree, like leafy lush tree above ground, and there might be a lot going on beneath the surface. And I think there are just a lot of parallels with mental health. And although my cousin was like, presentingly outwardly, so positive, so engaged, such a beautiful, like beaming light, like just absolutely most generous individual, there was just a lot going on that we didn't see. And I think that happens in so many families, that kind of unnoticed, unacknowledged roots tangling beneath the surface. So I've been using art as a way to explore that and kind of writing and reflecting on it, which isn't easy to put that down, but it felt like I was able to move past a lot of the initial pain that like kind of sent shockwaves through my body. And grief is ongoing. It's not linear, and I feel like I'm in a much better place than I was at the beginning of the year, but it's still, I didn't expect to get teary, talking about it, but it's still very present and like still at the surface of my body. So that's something I'm trying to work through and understand, and also give myself some grace as well, because it's okay to still feel some of that pain.
It is, and I know that it's incredibly painful talking about it. And sometimes you don't realize that the grief is still there. Like it's not going to go
Yeah,
right, and so it
yeah.
resurfaces. And then it's about managing yourself. And like you said, as the first time you experience panic attack,
Hmm.
and try to regulate yourself through this shock that went on,
Yeah,
with
yeah.
your cousin, and then you found solace in your art and being
Hmm.
able to write about it, not just do it but also write about it and share it with the world, which I think
Hmm.
is so incredibly brave, because people will be able to relate to it. The resource that you provided to say, hey, if I'm going through this, like someone else is going through this, I can look at this or read this. And I think it's just the most amazing thing that you're doing that, and you're raising the awareness up. That's all we can
Hmm.
do, really. There's a massive stigma still, and people avoid it. We don't avoid talking about how we feel, and so we numb ourselves with
Yeah.
other things to try and just
Distractions.
distractions, yeah,
Hmm.
alcohol, drugs, whatever it is, to just get through it. And
Hmm.
it's painful, and I feel we have so much to do, so much to change. But just talking to you, and being able to understand what you've been through, your experiences, what you're doing now, I think will help so many people.
Hmm. Yeah, I really wish that my cousin could have had access to some of these new tools and resources within psychedelics, and going through a therapeutic process. I think that would have been amazing. And yeah, I often talk to like his one of his best friends about it as well, who's a neurologist. And yeah, I just think it's like all of the power and like so much to come, I guess, from these types of therapies to help people like my cousin, which everyone probably knows of someone really struggling with mental illness, and how that can potentially be a resource for them, or like the mindfulness or the well-being. There's so many tools that can help people.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, thank you so much for being open and sharing. I guess I've like one last question for you, and that would
Yeah,
be, how do you find the power within you to manage your mental health now and safeguard it for the future?
that's a really good question. Yeah, how do I find the power within me? I would say boundaries. That has been such a
Oh,
big learning in working with you, and I know that's like definitely something that's buzzing around and a lot of people are talking about. But establishing boundaries to help us recognize when we've kind of wandered away from ourselves, and the importance of slowing down and doing that internal work first before trying to support others. Because if you have the tendency to want to help, or people please, or whatever it might be, really recognizing those boundaries are only going to be helpful for others as well. If you stop and do the internal work, the ongoing work that is never going to stop, it's not a quick fix.
what? When's it gonna? It never stops. It never stops.
Yeah, I think everyone just wants like a simple checklist, and that's kind of we just think we can just fix things, and there's a solution for it. And psychedelics aren't the solution. They are one way, one pathway, but there are so many ways you can support yourself to find the power within you. And I think the beautiful thing about the psychedelics is that it's all within. That is things that you can leverage within yourself to support you as an individual. No one else can do that. You are the one to support yourself in your journey. All of that wisdom is within. And so just recognizing that, being mindful of it, and paying attention to those boundaries. And yeah, when you kind of moved off that path or wandered away from that kind of true sense of self, which is hard to do, ongoing practice.
It is, and I think you are a great example of that ongoing practice. You shared all these tips and tools that you use, which are proven, right? They've helped you move
Hmm.
forwards, and now you're working in the space as well, which I think is amazing. So, Ali, thank you so much for sharing your journey, your time, being so open with us as well. I really appreciate you being on the podcast with us today.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.